What Drives You is brought to you by Ziglar, your premier source for equipping life and leadership coaches. Visit Ziglar.com and let them inspire your true coaching performance.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Kevin Miller. This is the What Drives You podcast, where we focus on your drive. Your drive is working in some areas of your life, producing great success, yet in other areas, maybe not so much. Let's get clarity on what you value, what motives are helping and hurting you, and get you fully into alignment so you're driving further and faster and enjoying the ride. Here is a business story that's really a humanitarian story, but overall, it's an incredible story of drive I believe you'll be inspired and equipped by. The story would make a great movie, and since my guest actually roomed with Matt Damon in college, it just might become one, for real. James Rhee, his parents migrated to America from Korea. James was driven to excel and please his parents, so he got into Harvard. But he really wanted to teach. So after Harvard, he went and taught high school for a couple years. Some of his most rewarding years, he says. But then he actually went back to Harvard and graduated from law school. But he realized he didn't want to be a lawyer, and he never practiced law. So he became an investment banker. He did really well, but realized he didn't want to do that either. So he worked in private equity, and he did really well, very well. He appreciated helping businesses, but he didn't like how disconnected he was from everything. So he ultimately quit, didn't know what he's going to do. Then he ends up in an unlikely place as CEO of Ashley Stewart, a fashion retailer that served plus size, predominantly middle and lower income Black women. And the company was at its end. The death knell had sounded. James came in for what was supposed to be 6 months because he felt obligated to help. He ended up there for 7 years with a miracle turnaround story that he's now described in a book called Red Helicopter, Lead Change with Kindness, plus a little math. You're going to hear a very personal story of James' drive from healthy to unhealthy. You'll hear a lot I think you'll relate to. You'll hear how Ashley Stewart went from death to stardom because it became a place and a brand of belonging, not fashion. Anybody who owns a business, you'll need to hear this story. You'll hear how success came not from communication, but connection. That's the point. And most of all, you'll hear how goodwill is the bridge to not only wild success, but abiding joy. So today, James Rhee, he teaches at Howard University. He teaches at MIT Sloan School of Management, and he teaches at Duke Law School. His TED Talk and his Dare to Lead interview with Brené Brown have reached millions, literally. It was such an honor to spend a couple hours with James. And as you'll hear at the end of the show, we're planning a t-shirt campaign together to advocate for the analog life. I think you're going to enjoy this. James, it was such a joy to read your book. I love the style that you did it. I read so many books, of course, just about every guest on the show. And I appreciate the story of it and just your heart shown through, which of course is so much of the point of the entire message. So I am grateful to get to talk with you today. Thank you for being here and giving us your time.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to talking. I would love to hear how you think about my drive. I'm going to learn from you and hear what you have to say. Yeah.
It's interesting. That's so much of the, every story I come into is an organic one, and different things interest me. And really it's the evolution of your story, which is it is your book, but it is your drive that took you from obviously very prestigious things, the things that the world tends to applaud, to some areas where you admittedly go, yeah, this wasn't very highbrow. I kind of left my high positions and went and did this. And why? So no, that's exactly what I'm interested in, is your evolution of drive. And I mean, even starting from the beginning. So here you are, you're a kid, you do school, you didn't go a whole lot into your background there, but obviously you must have done well, because out of it, boom, you go to Harvard. I mean, right there, that tells me something about someone. I have a kid right now who has just knocked it out of the park on all the, you know, the ACT, the SAT, and he's getting stuff from some of the Ivy League schools. He does not want to go that route. He has some other things driving him that he wants to do. You did, though. I mean, tell me right there when you, I mean, because we just jump in your story and boom, all of a sudden you're at Harvard. Was that an intent? Was that a goal? Was that something that at some point you said, I want to go to, you know, the most prestigious school? Tell me about the drive that was happening then as a kid.
I think it was a better drive than I had for most of my middle age. And I feel like I recaptured it during the course of the book. I think as a kid, I had a healthier drive. Like I was the first, my parents were immigrants, right? So like they had a drive. Like they had a drive to survive, and to have their kids eat 3 square meals, go to a decent public school, and assimilate, right, and sort of make a life and do that. My drive, unlike I didn't have that type of end goal drive. Like I loved learning as a kid. I had a lot of friends. Like loved music, loved any sport, loved playing beach volleyball. Like I really was a purist. I got good grades, enough to get into Harvard, but it wasn't like I want to go to Harvard. I love learning. So I tested well because like I learned well. Does that make sense? Like
it does. Yeah, I'm interested in your word though of healthy drive. I mean, that's a big part of my focus is healthy and unhealthy drive. I'm a product of both. And as of even late, I mean, I wrote the book, you know, it's been out a little, well, not even a year yet, but even since then, I've become even more aware that we're all driven. That's my standpoint. My research is that we are all driven, and yet we're often driven by, it can be fear or it can be good desire. So when you look back and say, gosh, I think I had a healthier drive initially, what makes you even say that? How do you define that?
Not fear driven. I mean, some fear is okay at times, right? And some shame is okay at times. But like when I was a kid, it was, I talk about, I felt like I was Harold in a Purple Crayon. Like I just loved exploring, and I'd meet tons of different people, read tons of different books, try any sport, not afraid to look and be ridiculous. Like I tried to do gymnastics in high school. I'm terrible, but I did it. And I did a floor routine. I was terrible. I did it in front of everyone, in front of the entire high school, and it was okay. I was learning things and trying to, quote, achieve things, not for external validation. It sort of just happened. Like I said, I got good grades and pretty good at these sports, and music has always been a passion. And I got admitted into Harvard. I think that was more my parents' drive. Like they wanted me to go. In fact, I didn't really want to go. Like, I went to Harvard more because it was really important for my parents. And so that's where in the book, there's a break in the action where as I start going through the world and collecting some of these external validation things, that those credentials started kind of getting heavy for me.
Yeah.
Like just weighing me down a little bit and saying, oh, I'm supposed to. I didn't know any better. Like I was going through life just fancy free.
Well, I am interested just in, you know, we're all affected by the exposure. And so here you have immigrant parents, and we know the stats on that from a success standpoint, that we tend to see more progress, successful progress from immigrants, because they come over and they see that the opportunity that we who grew up here in America don't tend to value, I think, as much. One, and two, you usually came over, you know, immigrants often came over and there were some dire straits. You had to make something happen. So was that seeing just the fortitude of your parents? Did it help you just kind of have that? It's an expectation. Of course, you're supposed to do your best and excel.
I think that's right. I think they, I've noted in the book, there was definitely survival, like scarcity syndrome in my house in terms of just, there was no one else here. And they're like, it's just the 5 of us. And if anyone gets sick, we're screwed. And if dad gets sick, we're screwed. Despite that, though, I think one of the reasons why I had less of that as a person, ambiently, I felt it, but I didn't internalize as much. I think the person who helped me most to not have that, was my mom. And that's why, and toward the end of the book, as I lose my mom, that was particularly painful because she was always a person who encouraged which was rare, I think, for a Korean mom of that generation. She was really the opposite of a helicopter parent. Like,
Huh.
she really wanted me the best for me, right? For like, she really wanted me to explore and really bend boundaries, because she wasn't able to as a kid. Like, she lived through a war. She
Yeah.
lost her father. She had no choice. I'm not sure she really wanted to come to this country. My dad, they were married, and so she came.
Yeah.
And so it was very important for her that I had agency. And when I look back, it really is the gift that she gave me, was that.
Okay, well, it's interesting, James, then to say, on one hand, you look back and think, okay, or feel like, it's a pretty healthy drive. And yet you admit that going to Harvard wasn't necessarily your drive. It might have been part of your parents. I mean, a lot of people are going to relate to that. That's a big part of my own
Yeah.
book, is how often our drive is the shoulds, the expectations from others, which is sometimes not healthy. Not that it always takes you a ride, but it's interesting to see you. So you go to Harvard, graduate Harvard. I mean, that's the holy grail for most people. And yet you get out then, and where's your drive? You go and become a high school
Yeah.
teacher.
Nice.
Not a
12,600 a
trajectory that,
year.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's an unexpected trajectory. And so was that you kind of, you said it was kind of a weight, having the big pedigree was
Yeah.
kind of a weight. So was it how do you look at your drive then? Do you feel like, oh my gosh, so now I just went back to my natural drive, or I was kind of trying to reject some of where I came from? How does it feel?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think the natural drive, when you fast forward all the way, and I didn't know back when I was 22, like I really, and I'm proud to admit it. I mean, I wrote an entire book about it. I really love people. Like, I'm an advocate for people. And sometimes as a guy in a type A world, that's hard to admit, right? I really do care about people very deeply. I've always been a teacher. I'm teaching now. Even when I was a CEO, I felt like I did it as a really good teacher. So yeah, I think that I was very wise at 22. I chose, my drive clearly wasn't money to make $12,600. Clearly it wasn't prestige. It was an unknown school. I was really happy. I was in the middle of Western Massachusetts, making a difference with some kids that were, some of them on the fence about their life, about where they wanted to go. And I was really happy. I was really fulfilled. And I think it was some of the most meaningful work I've done in my life was those 2 years teaching. So
Two
yeah,
2 years. Okay, well, so then let's ride the wave here. So there's the drive, to excel, but include your parents' drive. You go to Harvard, very prestigious. Now you come, and from a prestige standpoint, you step down and go to high school, not from a heart, but from a prestige standpoint.
yeah.
You do that 2 years, and then you hit law school, which to me is you're back in the prestige. What was happening at that point?
I didn't want to. This wasn't a last job. I was in the. This was sort of it wasn't Teach for America, but it was like a 2 year, not mission, but like I wanted to do something. I was grateful I went to college and like to give back, and sort of a pattern. Like, I learned something and then I teach it to other people who might be intimidated by it. Like that is a drive. Like, I don't like false pretense. I never have. I don't like people who make people feel small. Clearly that comes from a place of seeing sometimes my parents, particularly my mom, being treated smallly in this country.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of tolerance for people who make other people feel small. I just don't, or make them feel dumb, or make them feel. It's clearly not a sign of a great leader. It's clearly a sign of some self-loathing too, right? So I didn't know that in 1990 something, but I just
Well, and you experienced it. I mean, I read that in your, but you experienced, I mean, if we want to call it, racism, bigotry, whatever, you did. So you're Korean, you're over here. I read the story about out in the boat with your dad, and he bumps somebody else, and they just lay into him, not so much for bumping the boat even so much, but kind of hey, go back to your own country. So I would imagine you have a reason for this to be an acute issue.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was, and my parents thought that their drive was that, like, if I get this pedigree from this university, do all these things, that I would be less, or more immune from that or something like this. But yeah, it's interesting, right? In the end of the day, yeah, as I write in the book, it's like I know that from an early age, watching your parents,
Yeah.
were very generous people, right? They were like pillars of our community. They always went above and beyond. Yeah, they were hurt. They were sad. They're like,
Yeah.
and you don't like seeing that. I don't like it's just sad. So I'm acutely sensitive to other people's uh, sadness. I've always been that way. Like I just see it, and even if they don't want me to see it, I see it, and so I tend to sort of stick my nose in a bit and say, "I got you." Like we're
Well,
okay.
it's
Yeah.
interesting, James, if we look just at the area of relationships in general. From what I know of you reading your book and studying up on you, I'm always interested in what drives people in all areas of their life. So if we look at relationships, what drives you? If somebody asked me, what do you think drives James? One of the words that would come out would be equanimity. Would you say that's a key driver in relationships?
It is. I think that I tend to I hear people well, right? Their voice, their inner voice, what they really mean. I don't want to say I'm an empath. It's overused, but I kind of am. It's in the Korean, that's that word called nunchi. Like I can feel people's, and then I tend to like to create environments to where they can feel comfortable to achieve to do what they need to do and be themselves. I think generally make people feel very comfortable just being themselves. I get that feedback all the time. They're like, we tell you things we tell nobody. And so a lot of, whether my Jewish friends used to say, you should be a rabbi, man. Or, I was raised Catholic. They're like, you're like a pastor. So the women of Ashley Stewart used to say, you're not our CEO, you're like a pastor. And so I listen well, and I think I make people feel comfortable. And like, I don't ask them to be someone they're not. And I think I speak a lot of different languages. Like it's a language of not just literal language, but finance, philosophy, music, sports, I can speak that language with you. Like we're good. So I think equanimity is a great thing. I just want people to feel in balance. And then I think when you're in balance, you can really be your best self.
Agreed. I still want to ask, go underneath there. Why? What is that drives you to want to do that? Because is it one, a heart for that because you saw some of the injustice of not having that equanimity, and or is there an aspect of, there's some degree I want people to be comfortable because I want to be comfortable. I don't want them uncomfortable because then I'm uncomfortable. So there's a selfish side of that too. But where would you say, like, what's underneath that? Why are you driven to make people feel comfortable to the point to where they would trust you and divulge things there? What is that feeding for you?
I think it's yes, yes, and yes, right? I think part of it is, I'm not an epigeneticist, but I would bet there's some sort of genetic inclination because I come from a long line of primary care physicians. My dad was a pediatrician. My mom was a nurse, right? So caregiving is in the Rhee genealogy, right? And being a teacher is being a caregiver too in a different way, right? I think the other thing, was being sensitive to particularly my mother being uncomfortable for most of her life. And my mother was a great leader. And I was sensitive to that. And I think 3 is that, I'm sure that there is a self-serving component to it where like, I like to feel comfortable too. Like, sure, I think that's insightful too. And I think that where I believe my drive is, increasingly these days over the last 10 years in particular, as I've been formulating these philosophies, right? Red Helicopter is sort of an operating system. It's a philosophy. It's interesting that a lot of the early understanders, they tended to be physicists, creatives, musicians, like Buddhist monks. And if you think about what's in common with all of those, like physicists will tell you that their drive is to create something that's simply its beautiful system,
Yeah.
It's a consonant system, that there's not waste, there's not noise. It's very natural equilibrium, to using the word you used. All
Right.
four of those type of disciplines are seeking truth, like beauty. So I think a lot of my drive tends to be that type of drive, is like, let's find the truth. Let's just be truthful. I don't have same thing. I don't have a lot of time for pretense or false bravado, and just like, let's just get to the answer. Let's solve it.
Well, so it's interesting that you brought up the relation or the comparison to a pastor, because the next evolution in your own journey is you went from Harvard to high school teacher for a couple of years, and then you go into law. And it's interesting to take those two, pastor and lawyer. My dad, Dan Miller, recently passed away. A lot of people know him. He wrote the book, 48 Days to the Work You Love. And when he first started coaching people in careers, he said two of the top careers that he saw people going into for the wrong reasons were pastors and lawyers. Pastors, they wanted to care for people, and they were, from a religious standpoint, they were bought in. So they thought, well, I need to go be a pastor, and it often didn't fit. And then lawyers, whatever it is, if they wanted, power, money, prestige, even make a difference, but they would go into that, two professions. So one you're related to as a pastor, and then you went after being a lawyer, or went to law school, and yet never practiced law.
Yes.
Tell us about, again, the drive that took you that direction.
Yeah, I went to law school. I think a lot of people go to law school because it's a convenient standing. Like it's a safe transition point, right? So, and a lot of people find themselves practicing law and they don't really want to be lawyers. So if you look at a lot of studies and reunions, some of the most unhappy people tend to be lawyers, because the way the profession's wired, and also they have very little freedom in terms of their time not being calibrated, right? So part of this is finding agency. I think a lot of this is the real key to life, is finding freedom, which we'll get into. Like my drive has been sort of, it's freedom in sort of an agency way. But I went to law school fascinated by systems. I'm a systems studier, right? So a lot of this journey for me has been accumulating knowledge in many different systems and learning laterally and not vertically. It's like all these disciplines. And I had a lot of debt. I summered at a couple law firms, knew I wasn't going to like it, and made the correct decision in many ways, saying I don't want to be a lawyer. I've now experienced it. And two is that I need to know more about managing money. I didn't have any really growing up, like just the systems of money. And so I broke the systems again and muscled my way into some of these private equity firms that it was not easy to get a job, even if you had 10 years of experience. I just sort of willed it to happen.
And what was your degree at Harvard? I think I missed that.
Oh, I studied how people behave. So it was in American and English history and literature from 1603 to 1919. So really what I studied was, I supplemented that a lot with philosophy and economics. I studied politics, philosophy, and economics. It's really, how do people behave innately?
Yeah.
Similar to your interest, like why do people do what they do? And then on top of that, what are the human-made systems, that the design of these systems that prime people to either do more of what they're inclined to do or not what they're inclined to do?
Interesting.
So, like the law, economic system, financial system, constitution, like why do these, what design, when people design systems, how and when do they fail? How and when do they succeed?
Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting too, to look at that. So that's what you studied. I had missed that. That's what you studied at Harvard. Then you go teach school. Then you go towards law. Then you go into, private equity and investment banking. Where do you see drive is one thing, interest is another. Did you see a thread of your continual interest in there? If I could say, like, transferable skills and interest, because they could seem dissimilar at face value to go, oh my gosh, he's going there. It's like it's like a pinball machine is what it looks like. Or did you see some continuity?
For me, it always made sense. I've gotten that comment throughout my life. It used to drive my dad nuts too, by the way.
I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like it goes back to that when I said I had really healthy drive as a kid.
Yeah.
I was learning. Like I like to learn, and they are very transferable, right? It's sort of, I always admired the decathletes, the way that, that there's transferable skills in all 10 disciplines. If you train wisely, you can really leverage your training. I've always liked the sort of way that community works with one another. It's very supportive. Like you're competing against a point structure versus your other competitors, that it's a much healthier competition. And I always say this, that in theory, you can always win the decathlon and not win a single event.
Fair.
And, and then you have that famous Dave and Dan where, you have to compete well enough in each event, right? You have to score some points. So that's the way I feel like I've lived my life, where there are lots of different disciplines, like a decathlete, to really be able to figure out and maximize your agency and find, quote, freedom. So to understand the legal systems, to understand economics, to be able to be in a lot of different communities, to understand money, to be able to do growth investing, distressed investing, music. It's been a lot of these disciplines for me where I was trying to make the world make sense in my own head, that, this is why the systems are designed this way. This is why legally is designed this way. This is where money distorts that legal system. And here's the arbitrage. And I just didn't know enough. And so I studied a lot of these things, but not really as an academic. Most, if not everything other than 2 years as an investment banker, everything I've done in my life, I've been a principal. Where my money's on that line, it's my decision. I fail. I'm successful. I've enjoyed that. I like to have the ball in my hands, not necessarily because I want to shoot it all the time. But I do, I think it made me a better CEO ultimately. Like I don't have to take the shot all the time, but I like to have the ball to be able to distribute it.
So you want skin in the game in essence. And is that why you only spent 2 years in investment banking?
Yes.
Didn't scratch that itch?
I didn't want to be, like the bets I would make, I wanted to have the money on the line. I wanted to be the owner of the company or the owner of the decision on the board. And if I was right, then I should be rewarded for it. If I'm wrong, I should face the consequences. A lot of the things that's running through my drive is I'm not fearful of accountability, right? Like I embrace it. It's okay. Like buck stops here. I made a decision. I'm wrong. I'm wrong. I'm right. I'm right.
Speak to that. I mean, because you're involved with the current culture, the current demographic, from employees to coworkers and whatnot. And that statement, not afraid of accountability, actually desiring accountability. I want, with all positivity, I don't want to be negative, but I don't feel like we're at a height of a desire for accountability in the culture.
No, we're not. It's the opposite. That's so many of the reasons why I wrote this book, right? We're living in a world where, financially, if you look at some of the major, like an Amazon, for instance, right? A lot of their success is really morphed into, at least on the non-AWS side, just the consumer side, it's not owning anything, right? You run a marketplace, you don't own the goods, right? And you have very generous return policies, debt and field policies. So a lot of our culture, we're starting to accept inferiorly made goods. So that you just replace it. We don't have accountability, small business decline, right? Small businesses are accountable to their community. I was just with all the independent booksellers. You face your community every day. Financially, what a lot of the big cause of the financial crisis was that, Warren Buffett writes about the weapons of mass destruction in terms of derivatives. No one owns the paper anymore, the loans. So you book the loan, you skim the fee, and then you sell the loan and get it off your books. It's smart in many ways not owning these assets because you're you're not long an asset. You're taking the profit, you're margining out, but what I think one of the things that's gone with it is that we are psychologically becoming more and more of a society that, to your point, does not desire mistakes that for lack of accountability as well, right? It's like if you don't have physical accountability on an asset, then you shouldn't have communal or integrity, like a human to human accountability. And so I put a high value on my personal relationships. Kevin, like, we got to know each other and you were in like a bad situation, I probably would be one of the guys you would call at 3 a.m. and I'd come. Yeah. And so I put a lot of value in that. I like to be accountable. I think it's, I do.
Well, it's interesting, and I don't want to jump too far ahead in the story here, but as you talk about the things that we're selling, I know some people who are massive Amazon sellers that they don't own anything. They're just connecting the dots for people as a facilitator in essence, and making a gob of money, but they don't really have anything that they're actually selling that they're attached to. And I am aware in reading your story that one of the successful aspects of Ashley Stewart was the people's connectedness to what they did, to what they sold, the end product. Coming back to the Amazon thing that, and I know you see this too in the corporate scenario, especially, we're so further and further disconnected from the end product or service. I sit up in a cubicle, I do this, and I find some people, they can hardly quantify what is it at the end of the day that's being sold that pays your salary. And they're so disconnected. And some people can still find purpose in what they're doing, but I find there's a greater lack of that when they're not directly connected to it. And you seem to have done such a good job of connecting people to the end result with what you did with Ashley Stewart.
I want to live, with Ashley Stewart. I mean, I went, for your listeners and who haven't read the book yet. I was living the life, private equity guy, Boston. I'd made the decision I made because I felt accountable.
Yeah.
I made a bad investment. I wasn't with that firm anymore that made that investment. And I knew that it was going to end in destruction for that company and a lot of honest jobs. And it was a group of women, it skews, Black women who were really going to be impacted. And it's not like I don't think our systems are particularly accountable to these women, like in the course of Wall Street. And so, I felt accountable. So I took a sabbatical basically from my life for 6 months, and it ended up being 7 years. And look, I'm not driven by money. It sounds stupid to say because here's a private equity guy. What are you talking about? And I've done pretty well, but the money has been a result of really pretty sound decision making, really good relationships with people. Like, I can work with anyone, really. Like, I'm like, whatever, like, we're good. And I find a way to work with people. And I'm fascinated by bringing out the best in people.
Well, let me jump back then. I did jump ahead because, here you are, then you go into the, private equity or investment banking and then private equity, and you're there for a while, you do well, because you were there for a good while, weren't you? 6-8 years? Yeah. Something like that.
7 years. Most of my professional identity is in Boston private equity. Yeah.
So you're there, but now let's go back into the aspect of, how would you rate your drive at that point? Because I get the feeling from reading in the book that there was a sense of disconnectedness that you had at that point. Yes.
Yes. So I was getting disconnected. So I've lived up until that point. I think my life, I live an analog life. Like, okay. You know what I mean? Like, I sweat. Yeah. I like real people.
That's actually a great term. Can I steal that? I'll give you credit. Yeah. Cause that's what I feel like. I'm in a cabin right now. I just was hiking in a snowstorm, man. That's analog. I love that. That's your next book, The Analog Life.
Yeah. It's like, it's not like I'm a troglodyte, but like, I really like hearty food, stew, like with Guinness. And like, I like wearing like dirty sweats and,
we get along well.
Yeah. Okay. Grunge rock, right? It's just just chicken parm with cheese dripping off. And like,
Okay.
it's how I am. And like, it's how I like people too. And people, that's why getting them to just be themselves is important for me. I'm like, it's okay. Like, I'm not expecting you to be perfect. Like, it's messy. And let's just be. It's really one of my big things to live an analog life. And when you make real connections that way, right? Because you hear nuances that digital lives you don't hear. And you get to see all the flaws in people and their fears. And like, you're like, okay, we're good.
So
anyway,
reconcile that then, because, as you attest to in the book, the private equity life, that's again, back to that word, prestigious or, highbrow. I mean, that's kind of up there. That doesn't feel so analog to me. As you talked about, you're in private jets, you're jet setting, literally living that life. And you talked about that. That was my life. That was I don't think you used the word, your identity to some degree.
Yeah. And I wasn't happy.
And you weren't happy. Okay. Yeah.
No, I mean, I loved what I was doing. I think I wrote in the book, I loved what I was doing. I didn't love how I was doing it. Like
you exactly wrote that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I love private equity, like having capital to invest in businesses, grow businesses, create jobs, save companies, save jobs, reposition them. It's awesome. Like what a great thing to be able to do, right? To have 10,000 employees at this company, 2,000 employees at this company. These are real families. It's awesome.
So you did like the end result. I mean, the end result, you got satisfaction.
I love the concept of building things. I'm a creative, right? That comes across in the book. After a while, I like creating things. Creating things is messy, right? So, having the ability to create jobs, build great brands and businesses is awesome. And private equity, one of the differences between that and venture is that you're not spraying 100 bets and thinking 99 will fail and betting for one unicorn. That's not the business model. Private equity, you're making 20 investments and you really should want 18 to 20 like decent winners. So you are accountable to these companies, right? You're not banking on statistical failure. And I always say that, like, unicorns are great, but unicorns don't exist in the real world. I like things that exist in the real world. Get back to the analog thing. Like, why do things that are bad for people, like bad for humanity? I just would rather not do that in my life. That's the decisions I've made for me, right? I don't want to live that type of life. And I want to live that legacy for my kids. I don't want to, it's like going to a national park, like make the park at least as good as where you entered, hopefully better, hopefully plant a tree.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I what I felt startlingly disconnected with was that, flying on these private jets, and there is a disconnect for those of you listening who aren't in those boardrooms and private equity and stuff. It is disconnected from reality. Companies and employees and people, they are just figures on a spreadsheet, like for real. Like it's dangerous. But
and that's the how part that you weren't at peace with. Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't. And I wasn't. And I ended up leaving that firm, as you know. Here's another example of like the decisions I made, what drives me. I was offered an ungodly sum of money to stay. And my best friend in the firm was passive aggressively fired. And I had to tell him that he was fired from the partnership, and to watch one of my really good friends crying. And then I resigned a couple of weeks later. And so I think I turned down more money than my dad made in 20 years of being a single shingle private pediatrician. I mean, so that's another example. Like I looked at them when they offered me this money, and I'm like, I think I said something like, after 70 years, you don't know me? Like, I used to teach high school. You can't buy me. Like, come on. Like, we all know that. Like, every junior person in the firm, I was the guy who took them out bowling. We had no orientation training process. It's Wild Wild West private equity. But I took care of them. I was like their brother, like their big brother. I trained them. And I was like, you're seeing all of this. Do you really think I'm going to stay? Like, come on. And that was the most important tipping point in my life, was that decision. And as I wrote in the book, I hated myself for it too. Like, I was staring out in the backyard, looking at my little kids. I'm like, your dad's stupid. Seriously, I was like, there was a lot of self-loathing for about 6 months. I'm like, your dad's an idiot. Like just that feeling.
Was it an issue of, I mean, I define being in alignment using the drive terminology. Being in alignment is knowing what you want and knowing why, really knowing why, and being in agreement there. And yet a lot of my story is being driven, and I didn't always know the why. I was just driving fast. I didn't know the why, and I took myself to places I didn't want to go necessarily. In this scenario then, so that's the preface, would you say that you stepped out of that role, not so much maybe because you knew what you wanted and why, you knew just what you didn't want at that point, and that's as far as you'd gotten?
I think
you don't want that.
Okay. That's exactly what it is that I knew I didn't want to be that person, and that was something I had to come to grips with, that it was, I didn't want to be that guy. And you're right. So I'm staring there, and it was the right decision for like consonance and like just being in equilibrium. But at that point, I still didn't understand fully what I wanted, who I was for real, like the more proactive, like in the affirmative. What does that mean? Like, I know what I'm not. Do I know what I am? And I think that it took the next many years for me to really understand that. It took making what looked like an irrational career decision with Ashley Stewart. And it took, frankly, my dad dying for that to really, for me to see what drove me, right, and what drove him.
Can you go there for a minute? I mean, I know you did in the book, but can I ask you for this show though to go there? Because I've been reading your book over the past days. I mean, I read it some before we agreed to do the show, and but then been reading it, and you talking about your dad. James, you wouldn't know this, but my father, this last December, I was with him in Vegas to see you two at the Sphere, December 1st. December 7th, he got a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, stage 4. And January 21st, he passed away.
I'm sorry, man.
Thank you.
My mom, I mean, it must have been raw reading this book then, because
both accounts. Yeah. Both your parents. It was the statement though you said about your dad, and it was something to the effect of, because you got to walk with him, through the last part of it. And you said it was just, you didn't use the word terrible. I can't remember. You said it was just terrible. It was just yucky, terrible, whatever. And I saw some beauty in the first part, but then, so when you talk about his passing away affecting your drive, tell me more.
Yeah, I think part of it is that this is a nuanced answer. So one, the sort of sadder part of it is that I think that my dad and I, as I write, we had a complicated relationship, right? We were very similar, and he really wanted me to live a really stable life and live a life that was kind of less driven by what I really wanted to be. Because he lived through the Korean War, immigrated, ripped up a whole life in Korea, came here. And so I think a lot of his life, it's like the Steve Martin quote in Parenthood, he lived a lot of his life that he had to. Right? Like he had to.
Sure.
And he was a devoted father. And he worked so hard to, have us survive in this country. And he really wanted me to take the credentials of Harvard and things and live like this life, like that maybe not as joyful or as passionate, but that it was stable, that there's no war, and that
safe and secure.
Safe and secure. Yeah. And I used to sort of, our arguments sometimes were like, but Dad, you took so much risk so I could take more risk. You gave such a great gift of freedom, because that's what he did. And that's one of the things about America, whether you love it or hate it, there is a lot more freedom in this country still, right? To be. It's much less that in like a country like Korea, where it's really, really pretty regimented, like the success path.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the other
but James, that's but what you just said there is significant to me. That you looked. I think it's really important to me. You looked at your dad taking risks to bring you guys over here to afford what you could to have this life, and from that you felt like it set you up to take maybe even more risks from a stronger standpoint. Even, man, that is not, that's not generally, we hear the opposite story often, where especially even the immigrant parent story. Hey, I took all the risks to get you guys over here so you don't have to. And that's what you're saying is kind of what he felt, but you didn't. That's a shift.
Yeah, I felt that he lived a very free life. I was very proud of him for the decisions he made. My dad, he had the equivalent of like the Harvard thing in Korea.
Okay.
Right? He was a really highly decorated medical student in Korea. His whole life was ahead of him. And he made the decision he made. And I have a lot of admiration for that. He ripped up his credentials. He was a nothing here. And it takes a lot of guts. I mean, that's, and so I learned in watching him, I think it's a role model of sort of pursuing a life passionately. He was driven. Like Korea wasn't what was right for him in the 1960s. So he came here and he learned everything from scratch. And I can't think of a greater form of entrepreneurship than that. So he exercised agency. So I had a role model in someone who did that.
Now, but am I correct? I think it was your dad, not your mom. Wasn't it also him in the latter part of his death that he said, I wish I had let myself enjoy life more. Did I get that right? Yeah.
Yes. And I think part of that was just building the life he built. It was not easy. Opening up. I mean, I can't even imagine what they did. Like, I can't imagine moving to another country, learning a foreign language, setting up a small business by yourself, like learning your medical degree again here in a different language.
Yeah.
I mean, learning the healthcare system. So like he worked really hard. And
so then what did you take out of it? Then when you look at that and go, as part of your departure from the prestigious job and coming back, say, I don't want that. I'm not sure what I want. And him being a part of that, what was itching your drive then?
No, I think for me, like, one, I value freedom defined not in a reckless, independent, like cowboy way. Freedom in terms of like pursuing what you want on your terms, having agency. Like
autonomy. Is that fair?
I think autonomy is, yes, but qualified by the fact that autonomy really means building wonderful relationships with people. Okay. It's not a cavalier loner existence where you abuse people and use them as like commodities. And this is, very consistent with what people are missing, why the suicide rates are so high in wellness, and particularly among men, right? Men don't have a lot of friends anymore. Like, I have a lot of friends. It's been a strength of my life. I have friends all over the place, and they've always been there for me. I've been there for them.
James, I got a stat for you on that. We had Connor Beaton on the show. He's got a big podcast and a best-selling book, and he works with men. It's called Man Talks. And so I just learned this 6 months ago. He said that it was like 1986, something like that. The average guy would cite like 5 or 6 friends. Today it's one. Yeah. It's one. And if you've experienced it like me, a lot of the times when I talk to somebody now and I hear that they've got the one friend, it's not a very deep relationship. It's like, yeah, I got one guy I do something with every once in a blue moon, but it's not somebody you're doing life with that has your back to you. That's like the 3 a.m. guy that you could call who would actually be there for you. So I'm with you Yeah.
I got a lot of guys who call me now, and that, you know, guys in like quote prestigious positions, guys you wouldn't expect to call, they call and they're unhappy and they get very emotional. And, you know, again, sort of that sort of trait about people sort of opening up, and they cry on the proverbial shoulder.
Yeah.
And they're like, James, you know, like, we're not happy. We feel very trapped. And I answer, but how are you trapped? Like, you have enough money, then quit. And then the answer is where you were sort of saying I was, which is true. I know what I don't want to be, but I don't know what I want to be. And that's scary, right?
Yeah.
It takes really going back to being a kid, frankly. There's just where I am. I feel very young right now. Like, even though I'm 53, I feel like I was when I was like in high school. Like, just,
Yeah.
I'm approaching everything like a kid. Like, and I'm like, oh, I sucked at a lot of things at 22, but I got pretty good at them at 52. But so if I suck at things at 53, maybe when I'm 83, I won't suck at them anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's like
Yeah.
living another life. It's a second life.
Yeah.
But my dad, so I learned some practical things, right? I knew that money is very scalable and leverageable, so that managing money and having like money, my dad didn't know how to use money as a tool. As a private equity guy, I learned how to use money as a tool, right? It's not an end goal. That's not what drives me, but I know how to use it very effectively. My dad didn't understand the legal system in this country. I understand the legal system of this country. And it's not just because I went to law schools, because of the things I've done.
Right.
I know how to use the legal system as a tool, right? And so the things I've been collecting, all these tools, one thing that I've been very careful never to do, I don't use people as tools. I don't. So all these things, I'm trying to collect these tools so that I can help people who don't have these tools learn these tools, which is part of the book and why I'm teaching a lot these days. And I find that a lot of people who don't know these tools, they tend to blame themselves. Right? They say, oh, I'm an idiot, or it's just me, I failed. They don't understand how all the systems work. And so I like to explain it to them and say, look, if I explain to you that this is how the game is configured, and would you maybe consider stop blaming yourself? You're doing pretty well, okay? And so a lot of the stuff I do is also included in there as like a extra bonus of integrated wellness. So I'm teaching them money and law and things, but it's like counseling at the same time. I'm like, you're doing pretty well. It's not you.
Yeah.
And then once they see the landscape, it helps them understand better how to play the game that they want to play. I think that's.
Well, it sounds like you're back in the teaching role. I mean, again, as you talked about in high school, you like teaching. Yeah. So here you are. And if we now go into the Ashley Stewart, aspect of this, I don't expect at the time that you quantified that or defined it as a teaching role, but we see that that's what you ended up doing to great success. So give us the entry. I'll have told people about this in the intro somewhat, but here you are doing what you've done. And then you take this role with Ashley Stewart, leading a company, a fashion company, which you have no background in fashion. As you said, you came in your pleated
khakis, man.
Yeah, pleated khakis. So no fashion sense. It is a store for plus size women, which you're not that either, and don't have experience there. And at the time, at least, primarily Black women as well. Yeah. And so this sounds like a comedy movie script. Is where we just
there's been a lot of interest, I think the Cognitive Dissonance, people have always wanted to make this as a movie. It probably will be one day.
I was going to say, I was waiting for you to go, oh yeah, somebody's trying to buy the rights now. It seems like it's tailor-made.
They have been for a long time.
Okay.
That's me. I spent 6 months there as promised. I felt accountable. I tried to just get the company, like, for your listeners, it was laughably unsuccessful for 20 something years on like financial terms. It had like no Wi-Fi. Like, you can imagine, this was sort of not focused on companies, not on the covers of Wall Street Journal or Vogue magazine. It's just
James, I still want the decisive point though. What takes you from leaving the private equity, sitting in your backyard going, maybe I'm stupid, this is ridiculous.
yeah.
You didn't want that. Here you are. And I didn't quite grasp where it was that you've got this company, Ashley Stewart, that you felt like, you had been involved with, but here you are and going, okay, I think I want to do that. I mean,
it wasn't, I think I want to do that. I think it was more of a, I've really I have like, you may say it's an overblown sense of accountability. Like, I'm just going to say it's accountability. So we're sitting there, the company's about to liquidate in a couple months. I'm on the board in Boston. I'm still on the board. And we all know the math, right? The math is that the company was bankrupt 3 years before. It's running out of money. It's going to liquidate. It's not in a sexy desired asset class. It's not a sexy, quote, desired like consumer employee class. And all these things are swirling around. The words get said about commoditizing people. Like, words like that happen all the time in finance. Whatever. Who cares? Right? And it was probably a little bit sharper given the demographic. Let's be real, right? Okay. Like, who cares? And I'm sitting there, I'm like, this sucks. Like, this is, that cognitive dissonance. My dad's dying at the same time. And all of these things are just, I'm sitting there, 3 years removed. I had started my own equity firm. It all was there. I'm staring at my kids. Dad's dying. Mom's taking care of them. It brought back a lot of memories from growing up. Like, it's just, this was a kind of othered group. The women who I met before I made the decision, they did remind me of my mom. There was a silent dignity and leadership. They took care of their kids. They worked hard, honest. They worked honest work. They did a lot of really good things in the store. They weren't just selling clothes. They provided counseling, basically. And I respected what they did. And so I wasn't a complete idiot, man. I said 6 months, like, I'll come back after 6 months. And during those 6 months, I got to be very tight with the women in the stores. I became even more horrified about how the company was treated, because now I was on the receiving end as the CEO.
Yeah.
I'm stripped from about all my credentials are stripped. So what my monk friends said, I went away, right? I literally tore up my resume for 6 months. Harvard didn't matter. As you said, I'm like wearing khakis, pleated. I have no retail experience. On paper, everything I built my life for was not relevant, right? It was just like, so I was nothing. I was just like this guy. And I approached it that way. And I said, I don't know, like, I'm the least qualified person around the company. I get it, but I'm the only one who came. And that others might be fearful about that chaos. I wasn't. I felt very calm. It was actually very freeing, because it took me back to a point in time in my life when all I knew is that I loved sports. I thought that, I won't mention her name, but that girl was cute. I liked school. like learning. And I really liked to sing and like music. That's it. And I had fun. And I had real friends who liked me because I made them laugh and I was a good friend. Like, I had no credentials and I was happy. And so I was really happy during those 6 months of chaos. It felt like that again. I'm like, and I really liked the people I was working with. They were honest and decent, and I'll always be grateful. They were very accepting of me, despite not having the credentials. They accepted me, and it was beautiful. And so anyway, so I stayed for 7 years, because after 6 months, when I went around begging and talking to my former world, like my world of private equity and everything, explaining that this is really what exists, and here's the math I've done, I think it'll work. And by the way, I think that over the next 10 years, we're going to head into a period of time that I studied at Harvard, like pre-Civil War, that I see the same patterns and same tribalism, and people are lonely. And like, I said, this is what I studied. Like, this is my prediction as an investor. We're heading into a period of abject loneliness. I was like, you better reread Asimov and Bradbury and Atwood. Like, if you don't think a dystopia is possible, this dissonance, read. Like, it's happened in other periods of time. And so I said these things, desperately trying to get money. And the world said no. Like, and so I was left standing, talking to my wife, saying, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. Like, I know we're right, but the whole world said no. And do I really want to alter my entire life now and stay and call in favors? I called in favors to get the money. And I did. I ended up calling in favors. I felt I was right. And I was right about the math and the business model and the predictions for the future. And I felt really confident in the team that we had built. I was confident in that team. I knew that team would run through a freaking wall. That we were a better team than other like teams that are built as mercenaries. Like, this team was not a team of mercenaries. This was a team that it was blood, sweat, tears, like eating the Italian parm, and like it was messy. It was that team, sweaty.
Analog lives.
It was an analog team. Yeah.
Well, and I want to come back to that, James, because if we look at that and say, okay, so here you are with your pedigree and your race and a male and gender and everything, and say, gosh, how does that fit Ashley Stewart? And yet, as I found out, as I read the book, and as you've even talked about here, the aspects or the secret sauce of their business, you did relate to. I love the story of your mom, that she often felt, because of the language barrier and whatnot, felt out of place, felt uncomfortable. And yet when you saw her go to the Korean grocery store, she was in her element, and her back straightened up, her head's held high, because she's with her people. She belongs. And our desire, back to your aspect of loneliness, that we want to belong. And you saw that in a business, a clothing store for plus size, urban area women. And you saw that when they came in there, they were with each other. And that's what you related to. I love that spark of connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was my mom realized that at my dad's funeral. Like, I kept saying this was the inspiration, were these non-quantitative cues and the emotional cues. And she's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, I'm not plus size. I'm not black. I'm not. At my dad's funeral is when she finally realized. She's like, this whole thing, it's me. Like, and I said, it is, Mom. Like, they are just like you. They're really good to their kids, and they're good to their neighbors, and like, they don't get the credit they deserve. And I just applied all the fancy stuff I learned to create an economic system that rewards that behavior. Like, I created a system that actually rewards the type of behavior that people like Kahneman write about, or like cog scientists, and say, in theory, this is how people should behave.
Yeah.
But they don't. So like guys like Kahneman got disgruntled and said, this will never work. We built the system that rewarded pro-social positive externality behavior. And to do it, I had to sort of take all my private equity, law, accounting, finance experience and sort of know it well enough to adjust the primes.
Yeah.
And say, right, that's what people now, I think, today understand more. And I think that's why the timing of the book and the TED Talk and things like this, people are like, wow, you're describing a society and an economic system that we want, actually. And so I used to say that at Ashley Stewart, I didn't run a company. It was more like I built a world. It was a economic system, that it was a place that allowed people to have agency, where people could be. It rewarded the teammates you want to, like my plus minus ratio in hockey. Like it rewarded people who didn't score a lot, but who created goals.
Yeah.
And I finally got an opportunity to really do it. And we can go on. I'll stop there. But like these days when people say, oh, it's not possible, it's not possible. One of the reasons why I'm writing the book now and being a little bit more public, because I'm a bit of an introvert. It's been a tug of war for me to write this book. I feel like the story can provide affirmation for people who say, we know it's possible. And I'm like, yeah, look, you had a Korean guy, no experience, business for Black women with no Wi-Fi and 2 bankruptcies. And in 2.5 years, we were keynoting the most prestigious conferences in finance, tech, and I did a TED Talk about it. And by the way, everyone made a lot of money. I'm like,
it's a triple threat. Yeah.
You can't tell me it's not possible because we did it.
Yeah.
And you can do it. It does take a little bit of soul searching and a little bit of cognitive dissonance and discomfort and a little bit of unlearning. It is possible. And I'm not a Pollyanna. I get it's not easy to wave a magic wand, and I get it. I'm in the private sector. I get it. But leaders can make it better.
Well, and I want to go back to the tagline of your book, lead change with kindness, and then in parentheses, plus a little math. Obviously, there was some math happening. There was finance happening. There were best business practices happening and whatnot. I want to get into the kindness. I do want to because you talked about lonely people. You know that. I mean, the diseases of despair right now are leading the charge of, or at least increasing quicker in chronic illness and disease than anything else. And those are the depression, apathy, even on into suicide, that we are becoming more lonely and disconnected. And here you have I'm a sucker for a good brand, James, and to see Ashley Stewart, which I can't tell you I was totally aware of, but as I read that and it made sense that this was for, as you said, it was for plus size. Let's say plus size humans. So right there, we've made a differentiation, a niche, plus size women. Yeah. And this was geared towards initially, Black women as well. And then it also wasn't, I really appreciate that. It wasn't trying to cover up the curves. It was to showcase the curves. So I looked at your guys' Instagram and the word sexy is on there a lot. That is those depict a specific demographic where they knew what they were about. The store knows what it's about. And that's what you showcase. So when they came in, this was life, and this was their identity. This is who they were. And they were talking about an outfit for this work engagement or this date or this wedding or this whatever. And life happened. And it wasn't about, I think you said in the book at some place, it wasn't about I'm not sure if you said it wasn't about the clothes or it wasn't about the fashion so much. It was about the identity of that demographic.
It's about being able to be yourself. And remember, you were saying before, at that moment in my life, I wasn't sure. I knew what I wasn't.
Yeah.
And I was really grappling with, who am I? Yeah. I met a group of women who were very confident in who they were in that store.
Yeah.
And they also embraced not my credentials. They saw me. And to this day, I asked them. So you think about it. I was learning about what I am, and really sort of solidifying at 42 at that point. Dad's dying. There's a lot going on. Sort of like Valjean and Les Mis, who am I? I'm like, why did I walk away from that money? Why did I pick, I'm a son of 2 caregivers. I taught high school. Money is not a driver. That was clear at that point, right? And that at least dumb at least knew that, right? And then these women, they had every right to sort of reject me, right? If you think about it, and sadly, but they didn't. And so if you ask them now, when people have, and they're like, oh, we could feel his heart. We knew, that you were going to see this through, that you cared about people, cared about us, you were sincere, and that we trusted you, and that we also knew that you were going to fight to the freaking death. Because you know this, as much love, care, kindness. For me, as I've gotten at this stage, there's not from more pure, strong motivator for results. I'm relentless. For things I care about, for people I care about, I am relentless, and there's nothing that will stop me. And Ashley Stewart was that. Everything I'm doing now is that. I'm bending systems right now because I'm I don't care what you think the rules are. You made them up. And this is what I want to do. And so that's what they gave me at that point in my life. And it was solidified, getting back to my dad, at my dad's funeral.
Okay.
Like when he died and when I tried to be tough guy and not tell anyone and sort of grin and bear it, they basically disregarded my orders and showed up at my dad's funeral and hugged me and my mother and said, James, why wouldn't you tell anyone that your dad died? Like you don't have to be invincible. And I cried in front of the entire freaking company and the world. I just couldn't stop crying. And that was it. That was that moment. That was my dad's final gift for me. He showed me he lived a beautiful life. He had a lot of friends. His funeral and his wake, it was decades of relationships that came to pay tribute to my father. And what a life he led. And I just said, this is your last gift to me, Dad. Like, this is what I want. This is the life I want. And so I've tried to live my life like that.
James, man, again, I would be remiss to the people listening here because they know my story in this recent one. That's what I experienced just now with my dad. It's just been a month since he passed away, and the outpouring of testimony to him was unprecedented for me. I don't know of anybody. I know more famous people who may have more, likes on their Facebook page than he did, but actual testimonies to how he impacted people's lives was, I don't know the word. It was more than profound. It was,
it's a beautiful life. And
it was,
look at the sun. Look what you're doing. I mean, it's like, think about the life you're leading, the type of conversations you're happening.
I credit him. This is the world that he brought me into. And now I get, I make money having conversations that I would pay to come have. It's unreal. Again, your story, James, it's a great movie script. It's got to happen because even you connecting with these folks and you came, so here you are, here's the guy that would seemingly not fit in, and you come in and you take, you set your office out amongst them with cheap furniture and cheap, environment, and you come out and you join them. You have no judgment. You are there to champion them, and you connect with them. And you could say the rest is history, but I want to dig into some of that. Yeah. Because your ability to connect. And I was thinking about it this morning, or maybe it was last night, James, as I was reading, and you could look at we could pick apart your ability to communicate, but communication's the wrong word to me, because your ability was to connect. You connected with them.
I think it's sort of that's been a hidden, I use the word in Korean in the book called chang, and the English word that I write about is goodwill.
Yes.
That's the closest word. And so I think that, and then my Black friends, like the women, used to say you have a lot of soul. Okay. So those words, they circle around this intangible quality, but here's a story that's not in the book. When I was 22, I wrote for a travel book in Austria, and you have to picture me in 1993 hitchhiking in the Alps in Austria, not a logical face, in the mountains in the Alps. And, the cars would sort of slow down and be like, what is this? Right. And then they'd sort of let me in. And my German used to be pretty good because this girl I liked in high school and junior high school spoke German, and I took German, and they're like, they couldn't figure me out. And they're like, your English is perfect. I was like, yeah, because I was born in New York. And anyway, so all this stuff. But, Austria, which is not known for it's not like Italian or my Brazilian friends, right? I can't tell you how many times I got invited back to their house. And they would say, oh, you have to eat something. You're too skinny. They don't pay you enough to do your travel guide work. And here's some schnapps and Speck, which is like the meat. And they would invite me into their house. And I would tell my friends this and my parents. And they're like, what? It's been like that in my life a lot, that people, whatever the culture or the country, I don't know. I find a way to connect with them. I'm like, oh, it's just been, I didn't realize that. It took a long time, but it is something that I have. It's a being. Like it's just so it's this chung. That's in Korean. They would say you have a lot of chung, James. It's
and I'm curious, and I obviously that speaks so much, and I got that from the book, and even in talking with you now, and the word goodwill. It's interesting. When I wrote my book, What Drives You, my intent was to help people find what they want. That was my first thought. What they want, and even values, getting to their values. Now, drive is a relevant term, and it's a catchier term and a more compelling term that we use, but that's what's underground. I feel like that from you, even though your book, lead change with kindness. Kindness, we understand that word well, especially here in America. Kindness we get. But yeah, the word that seems to come from you most is goodwill. That is what it emanates to you most as. Yeah.
I think that I want to, you were explaining about, look how much positive externalities and goodwill your father's life created.
Mm-hmm.
And it all showed up. It's showing up. And my dad did too. And my mom too. And, this is why, at the end of, I think one of the things that a lot of Americans, when they say, what is goodwill? What does it mean? I think the most poignant example of this that people know is why they cry at the end of It's a Wonderful Life.
Mm-hmm.
That is the reason why that movie is so treasured, is that it's such a poignant 2.5 hour buildup to one scene.
Yeah.
Where Mary's trying to prove to her husband, look at everything you've done that's not in your bank account. And look, and they all came and they all gave him free money. It was a classic example of this intangible asset that we view as not worth anything. In that movie, it actually was worth money. Like people paid him money. And that's what I do as an investor or a CEO, hopefully as a human being. I always leave a little bit of extra on the table in any relationship, right? Just to give a little bit more. Why not? It doesn't, one, it's free. Two, why not? It's good legacy and good for the system, good for the community, good for the country. I think that's what citizens do. I mean, that's what the Greatest Generation did, and they died for it in Omaha. I'm not sure we would ever have that happen again in our country, like people volunteering to die on principle. That's a whole other conversation, right? But it also leads to great economic results too if it's not transactional. Great brands, a lot of.
I was going to say that's what I love about the book. It's kind of like, hey, do the right thing, and it paid really well too.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't ask for more.
Look at Apple, for instance, right? I mean, Steve Jobs, when he started Apple, that was not a technology company. It's still not. Steve Jobs had a philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
It was design. I think in a lot of ways, I'm discovering in me, I design. I'm a reluctant creative. I think that the thing that I discovered about me, my drive, is that I like creating beautiful systems that people can be themselves and thrive. Fundamentally, that's what I think that I'm good at. I enjoy it, and I'm relentless at it, particularly for people if they start doubting themselves or if they get bullied or the consummate underdog. I watch Rudy at least once a month.
Yep.
Okay. The natural, I identify with these underdogs. I think I'm a bit of an underdog. I know some of your listeners say, easy for you to say you went to Harvard, but it's my life, my path has not been linear. And it's I've never not wanted to be that kid in Ward Melville High School in Long Island. I was happier actually, learning, and there's very little expectations. And I get really motivated when people blame themselves for things they shouldn't blame themselves. And then I transform. I the dimples and I'm relentless. I fight for people, regular people. I fight for them. And
let me depict that. You have a story in the book of in the early days of coming to Ashley Stewart, and I think it was the early days, and you came into one of the stores, I think, and found a a manual in essence, a 3-ring binder full of all what I would call full of control.
Yes.
Do it this way, do it that way. You have to, and you were like, oh my gosh, seriously, they gave you guys this stuff. And on the opposite side, you seem to have empowered people to, as you just said a minute ago, be themselves. And you harnessed that.
Yeah.
And you got the best of themselves. And it paid off.
I don't like people being condescending. Like any time when people, I have a lot of respect for people in the way that they've lived their life, right? I'm not a big book smart type. I read a lot, right? But it's kind of like, have you done it? Show me. Like, show me what you've done. Like, and there's a lot of theory sometimes that gets too much emphasis, I think. And there's a lot of wisdom in people who don't have PhDs, didn't go to fancy schools, didn't go to college. They're not less wise, actually. And so, like, I admire like real experience, real work. And then, you know, once you establish that, I also then say, psst, hey, have you ever learned these 2 or 3 things? Do you want to learn a little bit? Like, it will help you. You know, and you should think about knowing a little bit of accounting, a little bit of finance. They'll help you. And the way I teach it, it's not like, oh, everything that you're doing is dumb and like you're what? I'm like, no, like we're good. And these things will help you too. This is why you may make your decisions even better. And I hope the book comes across like that too. It's like the narrator. Every now and then I'll break voice and say, psst, hey, I got to teach you a little bit of accounting, but just through a lemonade stand. You already know it. Like, it's not intimidating, you know? And I think education can be intimidating sometimes.
I like the depiction. So we just had, I think we just published, I think it's been a few months. I had Charles Duhigg on the show.
Yeah. He wrote a nice thing about my book.
I'm about to read it because it's so applicable to what you just said. So Charles Duhigg, and folks, he's, The Power of Habit, one of my favorite books of all time. Then we just had him on the show. I think it's just publishing right now. As of today, we're talking, it's February 2024. And I think the series is going right now. Charles Duhigg's new book, Super Communicators. So he wrote a testimony or an endorsement for James' book. And to what you said is why I thought about it. He said, imagine if your habits were infused with meaning. So it's not just the best business practices. It's not, I mean, you did good math. You did the right things that made sense from accounting wise, like you talked about. You taught the things that will help people in these areas. But imagine if your habits were infused with meaning. They were infused with care. I will read the rest of it. Charles goes on to say, this parable for our times will inspire you to transform yourself and your teams as they lead with integrity, agility, and courage. Again, he said, imagine if your habits were infused with meaning. That's the message that I got through your book, was you tuned into the individual's meaning in their lives and then helped them fulfill that through the work that they did in this department store, in essence. Yeah. Yes?
Yes. And cutting through, like, everyone wants to live a purposeful life. And then you also have you have to make a living. How do you reconcile both? And I guess one of the central themes in the book is that, like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, right? It's, you can do both. You can. And the language we tend to, increasingly these days in our society, the language of work and finance and accounting, it's co-opting the language of your life.
Yeah.
And we have to be careful. And this is why so many people are miserable. You can't escape the language of work in like your family room anymore.
Yeah.
It's constant. And it's this constant, where can I be myself? Where is there a place where I can just let down my guard and be myself and be an idiot and ridiculous? And where can I not be perfect? Where can I just, I don't know. Like, I think it's that. And like, I think that work, like, if you think about using the word language, we are literally, when you go into a different world with different rules, which is what I learned in law school. It's completely different rules that you never learned in school, unless you went to law school. And you throw people in work and expect them to be Like, good luck. All these forms and all this fiduciary duty language and employment and ERISA, all these things. Yeah. Sorry, we didn't teach you that, but good luck. And so I ask openly, part of this thing, why it's structured with life, money, joy. How can you have agency and freedom and that drive to really find yourself and really, when you're not taught about cognitive science and how your brain works?
Yeah.
No one is. That's like your first system. You're not taught about money at all, like in school. You're not taught about work, employment law. You're literally playing a game of Monopoly. You don't know the rules. And you're saying, okay, live a purposeful life, have agency. And
you're not taught the power of connection.
Yeah. And yeah, you don't understand that Harvard study that every kid should read when they're like, and instead we feed them these fantastical stories in picture books. And we say, be generous, be kind, be high integrity, which we should, but we don't give them the tools to back that up. So true story, one of my first TED Talk practice things, I was sketching out what I wanted to say. The opening it was a little dark. I said, hey, I think maybe we should just tear up all the kids' books. Let's stop writing these ridiculous things. Because maybe the kids will have less cognitive dissonance when they're adults.
Yeah.
We should just write kids' books. This is what we should write. You will be a tool in someone's employment machinery. Like, we will not teach you about money, importance of friendship, cognitive science, and we'll expect you to just behave. We will throw credit card applications into your inbox when you're 18 years old and have you live next to a casino when you're 19. And we're going to also tell you, particularly as guys, you're not allowed to complain about it. Mm-hmm. You can't have like a good cry or like, and just feel scared, and you're not supposed to ask for help. And that's what's happened to a lot of us guys. It's like who do you talk to? Like who? That's freaking hard, man. So
I mean, James, on that note, I was going to say this earlier and I'll say it now. You know, I greatly revere your testimony of not using people like tools, because I realized at a time in my life, I'm 53, same as you. And I realized at a time, I wish it was longer ago, that I did look at people at tools, and I came by it naturally because I looked at myself that way. As a guy, I am there. I was a pro athlete. I'm a tool to get on a bike and go across the finish line. No excuses, no limits. Nothing matters except whether you get on the podium or not. That's it, period. You're a tool. And then I took myself into work, career, took myself into being a dad, being a husband, being a dad. And I used other people that way valiantly. I thought, we're going after this great thing. We're going to save the world. And yet I took them for granted. I took myself for granted. I hurt relationships, and I ultimately hurt the relationship with myself when I burned out as a result of that. That I think our culture, and I would side more with men specifically, but all of us, we tend to be bred into that we are tools. We are tools to achieve X for this result. And it doesn't pay off. If it pays off in money, it also usually comes along with burnout and other collateral damage. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I think the trope in the book about being a helicopter, like that's one of the things I'm trying to convey, is that there's a kid book that I'm working on too. Like, I think if I had to do it all over again, I would want kids to sort of like, instead of teaching them to try to be like a jet plane.
Yeah.
To fly fast and hard and one direction and high and like freaking be powerful and win.
Go supersonic.
I think a better analogy. And then also like carry a lot of people, be the pilot, you know, and like be the boss, and like I'm got 500 passengers. And I think I'd rather most people live their life thinking like a successful life is being a helicopter. That you're very agile. You can fly in 6 different directions. You can land anywhere. You don't need, when you're in trouble, you can land. You can have vertical lift and you can go up. You may not fly as high. You may not be as powerful, but you're very agile. I think you can't carry everybody. You got to carry a tight group with you, but you can it forces you to teach other people how to fly a helicopter next to you, like a Peloton, And so I think that for me helped me like think about my life. And like, remember before you were asking about the decathlon, why I did a lot of different subject matter. I'm like, it helps me fly my helicopter better. Like I have more agency, and I'm like, oh, got it. And I'm never going to be the richest guy. I don't want to be. I'm never going to be the most powerful guy. Don't want to be. Just trying to live a life that's pretty balanced. Enough money, enough friends, enough interests, and that's okay. I think that's good enough. Like, it's good enough.
I think so. And back to the testimonies that we both have given about our dads, I look now and I go, not everybody's called to be on stage, to have a zillion connections. And I don't know that I care that 1,000 people testify at my death or come to my funeral, but do 5 people who I really matter to. And that's what it seems like, coming back to, you mentioned The Wonderful Life, which thank you. It's why I watch it every Christmas.
And you cry every time at the end, right?
Oh my gosh. It's part of my life. It's part of my rudder, ongoing rudder. I own Rudy too, just so you know, but It's a Wonderful Life. Yet on that, I want people to hear this too, because you have a testimony of the financial success of Ashley Stewart. Okay. So you went in there and ran it this way, different than, The Wonderful Life, where he does run into, he never has the money to do whatever. It's a great story. In real life, I'm enamored though with the success of you connecting with people, being about the people, and it paying off. And you're not a unicorn in that either. And I wanted to bring that up too, because we've had Monty Moran on the show. Monty was former co-CEO of Chipotle. That's his story. He wrote a book called Love is Free, Guac is Extra. But in that, he tells the story of meeting with like 20,000 employees and just understanding them and saying, how can we support them through Chipotle? How can it support their lives? We recently had Kristen Hadid on the show. She had her company was Student Made. Very similar things. She got to know and connect with the people. And again, I'm saying that, James, and I've missed that often in my businesses where I'm just going after the objective and I didn't necessarily connect with people. I can show you business by business, the ones where I did, and you can hear the testimonies of here's where I did it right. Here's where I did it wrong, that it pays off as well. I mean, that is the fairy tale, isn't it?
It is. It pays off. And I think you have to be a little bit more patient, right? We live in an impatient world, like short feedback loops. You want instantaneous success. We're all being primed that way technologically, right? They're all in our head on purpose doing that. And, I think the way I think about it, like this strategy, it takes a little bit, it's longitudinally longer, but that's good because money compounds. So that's why people like Munger and Buffett, right? They buy and hold. So we become fixated putting my money hat on for 1 second, right? Oh, yeah. You made 21% this year. Hey, that's great. But most people who build wealth, they don't talk like that. They say we made 20 times our money over 15 years.
Yeah.
It's not IRR driven. It's like aggregate wealth. So, and I think that same math applies to relationships. Relationships, goodwill compounds.
Yeah.
It just gets better and better and better and better. And it mathematically, the richness of your relationships grows like compound interest. And we are living in a world now where everyone's focused on short-term IRR and they don't have their relationships. For that reason, they're using the same language. The relationships are short-term IRR. We're done. Right? We got you. I used you for that Instagram something. We're done. And you're still my friend. And they're not your friend. And our brains will be wired this way for many more millennia. Like we're wired to have companionship and connections and common language. That's how.
Yeah.
I'm not the neuroscientist. You have guests that can, but that's what they say, right? I will take these relationships I had to the grave. Like I'm proud of our financial success. That was great. It was great that they could have, they still an honest living. And like, But what I will remember and what carries with me, yeah, it's the richness of my relationships.
Well, and I want to bring that into the business again, is the relationships that you fostered. So you're talking, I mean, you had the relationships with your, employees, coworkers, with the people involved in running the business of Ashley Stewart. And yet what they then did on the front lines is created relationships. And you talked about that to where you got employees who were going to visit customers in the hospital, who were having potlucks with them. And it reminded me, you mentioned the word Peloton in reference to cycling. But it reminds me, James, of it's been a long time ago. I read a little article from the then CEO of Peloton. I can't remember who it was. Peloton, the stationary bike, company at that point. Can't remember his name, but he made a statement that more and more people are not going to church in America. Which is a true statement. Every day we've got less people actually going to church. But he said they get the same thing by coming here. They come here to Peloton at that. They wanted to be part of that group. They want to belong to a community. Here you've got in essence, again, a department store, a fashion store, and that people came there to, just like your mom in the Korean grocery store. It's where they belong. It's my people. It's Cheers. It's the sitcom Cheers. It's where everybody knows your name. And you did that. How can we do that in our companies today, our brands? I'm ever more impressed these days with, we can buy whatever we want from 100 different companies. We ultimately end up buying a brand. Here's my wallet from Mission Mercantile, who my friend owns. I want to associate with them. Do they make the best leather wallet? Well, no. How can anybody make the best? Is it even that different? Not really, but it's got a little MM on it. I know what that means. I know who that's connected to, and that's an opportunity. Don't you think that we can all do with our businesses as we connect with our people? They connect with our customers, and we have a place of, is there a better word than belonging?
Yeah, it's a great, one of the things that will sort of make the world smaller, and like why I think people love the Ashley Stewart story. And the people who supported us after, the world sort of laughed at us for a while. And then they came, and the people that came, they looked like everything. You had every race, you had high powered executives in finance. And I remember Tim Ryan, CEO of Price Waterhouse, was very generous, very like Mark Benioff in Salesforce, very generous. And these are like white guys, right? Business, high power. And they said, we love it. Like, we know that feeling of belonging, friendship. It's real. Like, this is like what you all have created is real. We love it. And it transcends a lot of the very ugly dialogue we're all having in this country, right? It's like no one cuts each other any slack at all. This was a story that transcended all of it. Political parties, race, gender, all of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, our net promoter score of the brand was like over 90, which is like unheard of, because it was just transcended. And that's the reaction I tend to get why I say kindness in math, because after 53 years, I'm like, listen, if I can sort of everything I do with intentionality, just to use Charlie's like quote, if I can be kind and create positive externality and help someone have their agency and be mathematically correct, both of them, I'm pretty sure that my decisions will generally be pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good decisions. That doesn't mean to be kind and like you throw them money. It has to be mathematically correct too. Right. So.
Well, okay. I want to go there, James, because that's really important to me. You talked about being at the independent booksellers with a bunch of them recently. I used to go to the booksellers associations, to the big conventions, and see all the books and whatnot. And I went sometimes to the Christian Booksellers Association. I'd bring home bags of books. They just giving books out. So I'd bring home bags of books, and every once in a while I'd pick one off the shelf. And James, man, I had some where it was one of the most profound books I've ever read. I know that the person who wrote it felt like they got a direct line from God, that this was an anointed, enlightened writing and sharing. And I'm reading it and I'm thinking, I agree. And yet I also know they're going to sell like 2,000 copies because the cover sucks. The title's stupid. There's no marketing behind it. And so when you talk about that kindness with a little math, now I'm saying that and stepping on my own toes because the amount of things that I've gone after, I get touted as, Kevin started 19 businesses. Well, that sounds good, but it's really because some of them failed. Some of them I had no business doing. Some of them I walked away with because they succeeded, but I just didn't care about them. It wasn't a great story and it wasn't great math a lot of times. I think I went after it with good heart, good intent. And we want that to lead and go, my gosh, if it's good, it'll make sense. And yet if the math is bad, I've seen too many and experienced them go down the drain.
Yeah.
So I greatly appreciate you making math a part of it because I and a lot of people with great intent, great products, great services have gone out. And when you don't do the math well either, it's not always some great supernatural story. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of what's happening in our society in terms of, it probably wouldn't surprise you. Like this book and it was featured in like the Daily Bread. Right. Okay. And then so there's been a lot of people who email me and say, what religion are you? And because I was Catholic and then, I read a lot of Buddhist philosophy too. And I'm kind of like, sure. Yes, I am. Right. And the Buddhist monks have approached. Right. So a lot of the faith-driven organizations have approached me and they said, we really, really, because kindness is it. And by the way, kindness has wrath, right? Bible has wrath. Like, there's accountability. It's not, you have accountability. And so, what's happening as faith declines and, words like kindness, there are fewer and fewer places to sort of talk about it. And I'm trying to introduce the nomenclature into work or to just being. And like in the book, I talk a lot about this. Kindness is not a religious term. It actually was the foundation for our democracy and like capitalism. It's about agency.
Yeah.
There's a secular meaning to kindness. That's just not giving cookies and random acts of kindness. That's not. Fundamentally, it's helping others find their agency. That's what it is. And anyway, so that's the bet I'm sort of making, right? Like, I think that this world where we're going, talking about brands, this book is a book, Red Helicopter, but it's also like writing a brand manifesto, right? Red Helicopter stands for this.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I'm doing.
I know how I define it. James, you've used the word agency a lot. Mm-hmm. Give us your definition of agency.
I think agency is when you are able to make informed decisions based on risk return and understanding properly the plays at hand, that you can make decisions that influence the outcomes in your life. They are not perfect decisions. Many of them will be wrong, but you understand the risks, you understand the returns, and you have the ability to make decisions that influence the outcomes.
Okay.
And it often also ironically involves, I think, a real understanding, like Keltner writes about, like the feeling of awe. Real agency knows that you are not in control of the vast majority of things. It's oxymoronic, that there's a degree of surrender, that it engenders a feeling of humility, that you do the best you can under the circumstances, you make the best decisions you can. And you also have the humility to know that you can't control everything. And you particularly have the humility to know that you are not better positioned to make decisions for certain other people, even though you may think you're better than they are. Right? It's having respect for other people's agency is the definition of agency.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in that one you just said, gosh, I would hope, I'm sure I'm guilty of it to some degree, but even that I have taken responsibility for others' outcomes out of my own need to, be the tool that fixes everything. I don't know if I thought that I know better than them, but I want to protect. I want to take, and I took responsibility. And I've seen that in the workplace with a lot of well-meaning leaders as well, as they want to take care of everybody and they take responsibility for things that they shouldn't be taking responsibility for as well.
And credit, right? As well.
That too. Sure.
Oh,
fair.
Usually they take credit, but not the downside. I think this in the retrospect, one of the smartest things I did, because it was intuitive. A lot of this book is also about intuition, right? It's not like second guessing yourself and mistaking education for wisdom. Like, I think that's the other thing. Sort of an anti-credentialing book. It's when I admitted to everyone, I just said, I may be the least qualified person to run the company. And so teach me, show me. And so I do that a lot, like in every context. I think a lot of like Taoist writing, right, is like great leaders, wise people don't have to speak a whole lot. They're very, very quiet. And you allow people, you give space for people to do their thing and you observe. When I say that, I looked at half the room and the ones that were laughing at me, I sort of giggled inside. I'm like, you think this statement is weakness? It's not. It's ultimate serene strength. The truth. I am potentially the least qualified person to run the company. Like, if I came in here saying I knew all the answers, what a fool I would be.
Yeah.
To say. I think we lionize leaders that actually behave that way a lot, right? I know all the answers. I'll solve everything. And companies get themselves in trouble with leaders like that. We teach them the wrong way, I think, in schools, and the movies lionize. It sells tickets. I think George Bailey was a great leader.
Agreed. And he was the reluctant leader, as you've talked about too. And it's interesting. I watched some movie, I can't remember, James, probably in the past 6 months. And I'm recalling it now, where they were leaning on a character to be the leader. And he said, I don't think that I'm the best for the job. And they said, that's exactly why we want you.
Totally. I remember the ancient Greeks used to have a system where they would ask you to leave the country after about a year. You leave the polis, because they wanted leaders that you do what's right for everyone else, and then you have to leave. That's why we have term limits, right? That's why we have all these things. And I hope that we, as a country, I think really sort of, I think some of the best leaders are the ones that listen the best. They're very quiet. You don't want to hear them all the time. You kind of want to do your thing. You want to have the agency to do it. That's why I use a lot of music analogies in the book, right? I think, like, you can play an oboe, you play the violin, trumpet, you're good. But in this system, you will play it in a way that doesn't make the group sound bad. It should sound better. So sing your voice. I think team sports are a lot like that too, right? It's like what Phil Jackson did with the Bulls.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that triangle system that he came up with, they bought into a system. And they bought into a system, and he took, arguably the best basketball player ever. He bought into a system. They won 6 championships.
Well, I'm looking at your system in the format of the book, and it's interesting, James. We had William Ury on the show recently talking about conflict, and he talks about. Did you really?
Yeah.
Where? At
the Independent Booksellers Association.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I did the morning keynote. He did the afternoon keynote. He's
such a gem. We did a couple shows together. Then I had him back on to co-host with me as we did a show on Thomas Hubel. And he only lives a couple hours from me. So we're looking at getting together with William. So it's so great that you got to see him. I haven't seen him in the flesh yet. I will soon, but he talks about within conflict, the value of building a bridge. When you're in conflict, give somebody a bridge to get where they want to go, to get something out of it. Okay. Case in point, you're back to bridge again. I really value how you laid out the book. It starts off with life, past, present, future. Then it goes to money, agency, balance, integration, things we've talked about. And then the bridge of goodwill to get to, again, to what drives you, joy. And man, at the end of that, going back to your dad, my dad, as they saw their last days coming, and nothing matters at that point more. The life that we just went through by rote, the money that we made, not to discount it. It helps pay the bills. But at the end of it is the drive to joy. And how often do we miss that in our efforts?
Yeah.
And what is it at the end of the day?
One of the things that's building on like the helicopter, like I didn't put this in the book with the graphics. So even though there are illustrations, it's not this. Like I always picture the way I teach this to CEOs or students is the body of the helicopter is your life. That's you. You're the pilot. That's your thing. The rear prop is money. The top prop is joy. And so helicopters are designed because what makes the motion vertical if possible, like that you need a rear prop to offset the torque of the top prop. So otherwise the helicopter would spin.
Yeah.
So it's Newton's third law, right? I think a lot of times we tend to put money as the top prop and then use joy as the offset. But when you talk about drive, I would prefer brands, companies, people fly to your drive. It's joy, but you have to understand money. Yeah. Like you can't just, you're living in the real world, right? This is not like you're not living in a mountain in remote Tibet. You're not in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. It's real. This is real stuff that, I think if you position yourself that way, I think the helicopter flies more in balance. And again, you may not fly as high, right? Like maybe you don't fly as high, but I think the helicopter is more in balance. And I think particularly for young people, like you and I are lucky in some ways. We're Gen X. I think Gen X has a real role to play in leadership, by the way, in this country. We'll get to that. It's an interesting generation. When I look at my students at MIT and Howard and Duke, they're scared, right? They're like, we may have to change our careers like 20 times. And I'm saying to them, yeah, I get it, but that's because you're being taught a curriculum that sort of looks at change as like an anomaly.
Yeah.
Right? So change is normal. Like you shouldn't be fearful of it. So like that helicopter analogy, they have to know how to be agile. They have to be able to land. They got to change directions. They're going to have 20 careers.
And your analogy of the rear prop being money, again, back to what we talked about a minute ago, I still come across that, and well-meaning people say it, and people who are successful have said it, that you find that thing you care about, you find that thing you're passionate about, you find that purpose, and the money will follow. I have seen that run aground. Maybe money's not the total focus and motivator. You've talked about that doesn't necessarily motivate you, but you still had a plan. And if we go after the thing, and I'm raising my hand as one of the chiefest of sinners over time of just going after the thing and thinking the money will follow, but not having at least a rudder, a plan at all. I say, no, you can sabotage that effort.
Yeah. We got to teach people about money, and it's not in the curricula. Like the curriculum I'm teaching. It's like learn how to buy a company like a private equity guy. Like it's very easy to teach. We just don't do it. And I have a lot of entrepreneurs I'm around, and like they are tremendous operators, but they don't know the first thing about money, about capital. And I'm like, well, then let's teach it to you. Like it's like rudderless dreams. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, it works out every now and then. But it generally doesn't. And I've been spending a lot of time with artists actually these days, like musicians, artists, creatives, because that's an industry in particular. They do incredible things. They really create. They're not just moving money side to side.
Yeah.
They're creating. But a lot of them are like view money as dirty, or they're intimidated by it, right? Oh, money's dirty. I always say to them, it's not dirty. It's dirty depending on who uses it, but you still know how to use it. And you can't have true agency without understanding and having money. You can't.
Okay. Thank you for saying that, because I was going to bring that up next, is not only having a plan for it, but questioning. And you said this in the book, and I forgot the term you used, but it was something around the emotions or the feeling of money, which my muse for that, I should say, is Ken Honda, who wrote the book Happy Money. He endorsed my book, and he was the one that really brought that perspective of the power of our emotions around money. So one, having a plan, and two, so let's say you're an artist, you got a great dream, but you're saying, okay, you can't have a rudderless stream, so you got to have a money plan. So let's say you have a money plan, but if you still think of money as dirty, you're still headed for trouble. Yes?
Yeah. And yeah, it's like, why? It's like the decathlon. It's like, why would you not? Oh, I don't want to do the pole vault or the 400 meter. Then you don't win.
Yeah.
You got to be able to at least place like 8th, right? Put up some points. I mean, this is what worries me also. It's a side note, but it's running throughout the book, is that in a society where we're increasingly, it's faster, more difficult, you have to be more agile. We are eliminating teaching people like broad understanding of a lot of systems. Like saying you have to be hyper specialized at 20 years old. That's what you're going to do. I think that's the worst advice you can give someone right now.
Yeah.
You know, so everyone should know about money. And it's not just like balancing your checkbook. I think we're so condescending to the way that we talk about financial literacy is so condescending. It's like, balance your checkbook. Like, this is what interest is. Yeah, we have to teach that, but there's more to it than this, right? This is how corporate law works. This is how shareholder equity works. This is how accounting works. This is how you value a company, so that when you take a job, you know if the company is doing well or not with an investor's perspective, not just as an employee's perspective.
Yeah.
People understand this, and we're just choosing not to teach them this.
James, I'm holding up the book for those who are watching the video, but with this book, and mine probably looks different than anybody else's. I got an initial galley copy here, but with this, you said it was, I don't know the word you used, laborious. It was an effort to write, but you did do it. Who does it come across as you had a passion to write it, or it was something that it was a burden it was a burden you felt for people is why you wanted to bring it forth? It was something that broke your heart. What is it? Who did you write it for is more the question. Who did you write it for, and what did you want them to get out of it?
I wrote it. So first of all, like it's like me, it's an edit. I think the independent bookstores told me, they're like, boy, this is going to be fun to figure out where to put it in the bookstore. Is it a business book? They're like, yes. Is it a life book?
Mm-hmm. So I was going to say this is, I'm in this podcast is in self-improvement. So
yeah. Is it self-improvement? Sure. Is it philosophy?
Sure.
Yeah, it is. Right. It's a bit of a future book, like where the world is going. It's underlying that, right? A civics book, right? Or what are we doing as a country? I wrote this book. One, it was a thank you to a lot of in particular, the women I worked with.
Wow.
And you don't have the acknowledgments in the galleys. When you read the acknowledgments, I thank them again. And, they wrote to me, I think in the acknowledgments I wrote, one of them reached out to me the day that it was my last day. And they said, she said, I'm crying writing this, and we will always aspire to be a reflection of the person you saw that we were.
Wow.
And I wrote back in the acknowledgments, I said, I never responded because I didn't know what to say. Wow. I didn't want to make the parting more sorrowful, but right back at you. Like they saw, I was as close to my best self with them than I've ever been in my life. Flawed and making mistakes, but I really wanted to be I was really a better me. And that better me was making better decisions for other people, like ego gone. Like it was very clear. I wrote it for my parents.
Yeah.
And really I wrote it for all those groups we've talked about, like anyone who is confused, doubts themselves, blames themselves, and say, how come it must be me. And the tone of the book is not prescriptive, right? I hope it doesn't. It's more like, no, you're all right. And then let me explain a few things that may.
I would say not descriptive, but it's a guidebook for sure.
Like almost like a Buddhist guide, it's like a trail guide. I'm walking with someone and saying, like, hey, we're walking together, we're good. And then I stop and I'm like, hey, an interesting lesson here. Let's keep walking together. And I'm not leading them. It's a trail guide. I'm walking alongside them versus pulling them or waiting for them on top of a mountain saying, come get me, like I'm here. I wrote it that way.
Yeah.
And so when I wrote the book, a little thing that I haven't said to anybody is that when I sort of wrote the proposal of the book, and by the way, Bill, Uri, and I have the same agent, Jim Levine, who's great, right? And we put out the publishing industry. Almost every single house wanted me to write a business book. We want like private equity, how to make a lot of money, how to transform an organization, how to lead as a business CEO. And I kept scratching my head out, here we go again. Like, is that all you hear from me? You know, you think that's the only thing that happened in my life and who I am? That's not me. Like, I can do that. And so Harper, who I wrote it with, they were very gracious, right? They're like, no, it's sort of it's like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance meets a business book. And it's a book about life, isn't it, James? I said, yeah, it's a book about life. And part of life, we work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's why the chapter order, the first section is life. It's the most important. And then the end is joy. And the sandwich, as you said, is money, because it's just, it's part of it.
So where do you go from here? What is driving you now? Book comes out. We're sitting here talking. The book comes out in, I don't know, a month or more. And what's the primary driver now?
Well, I'm building, this is going to sound zany. So I'm going to answer it in two different ways, both as someone who's been around with a lot of consumer brands, right? So I know how to build brands. Like, it's one of the things as a business person I know how to do, right? And then I'm also going to answer this as sort of a teacher, person that really likes young people and anyone who could use a little bit of a nudge. And then I'll say to your also listeners, like, you know, it's funny. Like, I think I've been told this, like, it's like, oh, you're kind of like a little bit of Mr. Rogers and a little bit of Trevor Noah. Like calm, and then boom, right? Something, it just comes down. And so I'm like, yeah, that's it. So what Red Helicopter is, it's like I know how to build like systems. So it's Red Helicopter, it's like a system. So the book, the curriculum at Howard, MIT, Duke, I'm learning how to teach what I know how to do. And that curriculum is getting a lot of interest from PBS, from the Business School Deans Conference, the Independent School Headmasters Conference. So if you think about where education's going, I think that I can teach not just adults, but young adults, JD MBA, Cog Sci degree, and civics in a year in a very practical way, and teaches them how to be, quote, successful, end quote, successful, right? So emphasizing the civics and their own wellness while teaching them accounting systems and financial systems. So I always teach it twice, right? I'm like, this is the way you will classically learn it. And this is, if you really master it, you can tweak it to actually have arbitrage. And then the other thing that's happening, like the book, there are a couple more books I'll write that are, one will be more like less narrative, a little bit more practical. Like, this is the curriculum. There'll be a kid's book. There is a lot of interest in the movie. And I've been composing music. I mean, like the book is written in E-flat major. I mean, it's structured as a musical. Like, the way I interface with the world, I hear sounds. It's like, and then I put them into like math. You know, or I meet a person, I'm like, oh, like Kevin, you're like a trombone, man. like D major trombone.
Okay.
And I'm like, I got it. That's cool. And then that's how my brain works. And so like I'm working on like a mini rock opera. And then I'm partnering with the small business development centers across the country to give this curriculum to all small business owners in this country. And then I'm tying all of these groups that generally don't have access to financial capital. After I teach them some things that would be helpful to them, I'm connecting them to my other world, which is more the world of Wall Street. I'm trying to change the underwriting formulas for these businesses so that they have access to capital.
Yeah.
I'm really worried about the demise of small business in this country. England has gone through this. It's not pretty when that happens. And I think it has a big impact on democracy. And so the book tour that's coming, it's less a book tour, like it's pre-launching at Howard University. And then Mayor of Newport, Rhode Island is hosting me a convening. It's like a Federalist Papers. So it's a lot of these civic leaders that are hosting me to talk about what this book means, about the relationship between the economy and civics, where the country's heading. And because my friendship base tends to be pretty naturally like the United Colors of Benetton, people,
Fair.
I convene like America, and when I'm in the world of Red Helicopter, like people don't fight. I've made speeches, worked with CEOs, made investments in companies and leaders that you would, in the press, would make them seem like they hate each other, but they like the philosophy of the book. They're like, we love this.
Yeah.
Like, well, great. Let's just start with that. And so Red Helicopter, if you think about it, it's like I don't know, is it kind of a brand that is kind of like Pixar heart, but that is financially sophisticated?
Yeah.
That.
Well, man, I am grateful. I'm grateful for the message you put out, for taking the effort to do it, for taking the time to be with us here. Obviously, we'll be promoting that everybody go get Red Helicopter. You can get it at Amazon. As of the time this comes out, it'll be available there as well. Is there any place else they would go and connect with you, James?
So they can find me at redhelicopter.com, and there's sheet music and videos that sort of put the art into the book, like they can immerse in it. I have a very nascent and begrudging social media thing at iamjamesrhee.
Okay.
I can't do it. And so I've been struggling to figure out how to.
I feel your pain, but I did go there and I looked at you. I saw you with, on Simon Sinek's show and Brené Brown and whatnot. So, but I feel you on that. Sure.
Yeah. I have, I want to meet people in an analog way. And so that's
fair.
And that's what I hope your listeners can help me figure out. I think it'd be healthy for this country to sort of reintroduce some analog into.
We'll have to talk further on that. Maybe that's another show, living the analog life in a digital world. I love the term. I might need a t-shirt, living the analog life, or a sticker or something that we can use.
Why don't we design one together? Like the thing that really it's in the book. What resonates when I speak about it publicly, your listeners may like this. You may like it's digital life means that you are a 0 or a 1.
Okay.
And I've never wanted to be that. And I don't treat people like that. I'm like, in my mind, everyone's a 2. I meet them where they are. I'm like, I'm not going to put you in a 0. I'm not going to put you in a 1. Like, you're a 2. And so I think that's also a good number for agency. It's kind of like you're yourself. And I'm not going to put you in a bucket like that. I think that all that binary thinking, it's killing us.
Yeah. No, it is good. I'm thinking of a sticker right now, live in analog.
And the number should be like Derek Jeter. You should say Team Analog on the front, and then the number in the back is 2.
Is 2.
That's Kevin. That's what we should do.
Okay. I'm game. I'm sitting here. That's part of my outdoor. I'm in the mountains in Colorado, and stickers are a big thing here. So you put them on your Nalgene bottles or on your car or whatever, and it's the stuff you want to associate with. I'm game. Let's do it.
I'll do that with you. Like there's going to be a whole Red Helicopter like financial product one day, like 529 accounts. But it's also there'll be products. If you want to do that, let's do that. I think
let's do it.
Well, maybe we'll get Derek Jeter involved too.
All right, deal. Deal. Hey, James, it's been a gift. Thank you. Thanks for what you're doing. I am eager to remain connected with you. We'll see what we can do in the analog world. Yeah.
Awesome, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey. I look forward to meeting you in the Drive Tribe community for ongoing discussions about each episode. You can subscribe to the Drive Drop newsletter for weekly updates. Find it all at kevinmiller.co, along with all our social media and video clips. Until next time, I hope this episode helps you drive further and enjoy the ride.